So why has Microsoft renovated ASP.NET? The web stack that ASP.NET is based on is pretty old. It dates back to .NET 1.0, which is about 15 years ago. And ASP.NET is weighed down a lot by this unused code in the .NET framework. There is a lot of old code and legacy code that has been stuck and entrenched and having a lot to load even when it's not even being used. As you can see from the second point here, the dependency on system.web.dll was the biggest linkage between the older ASP.NET and what ASP.NET MVC and Web API were trying to free themselves up to follow modern technologies today. But the dependency on system.web has slowed down to some extent the .NET framework. With ASP.NET Core, it's trying to eliminate the dependency on system.web to enhance the performance of your application. Another reason that Microsoft renovated ASP.NET is that the machine-level dependencies for the upgrade process were very tedious. Your application is tied to the machine it's on, and if it doesn't have the newer versions of ASP.NET installed on it, your application may not work. For example, if you're running an app with ASP.NET 4.52, and that's how it's compiled, and you're running it on a server or a computer that's only running ASP.NET 3.5, your application will not work. In a lot of cases, the dependencies are on the version of .NET installed on the operating system. So in this case, with ASP.NET Core, you're not tied so much to the machine that it's running on. Now the application runs in its own process, and then you can decouple away from the machine-level dependencies that your app runs on. This ties into the next item that now you don't have the full .NET framework installed in your application. This improves app performance, and it's no longer tied to the speed of the device that your app is running on. So these are a lot of reasons why Microsoft renovated ASP.NET. So what is ASP.NET Core? ASP.NET Core is an open source and cross-platform framework for building modern cloud-based web apps in .NET. It is a single platform and open source, as stated before. Single platform meaning that MVC and Web API are tied together into one application and one unified programming language. They are no longer separated in ASP.NET Core. And the importance of this is that now your MVC app and your Web API app are compiled into NuGet packages when they run. You no longer are separated into two different application types. Now you can build your MVC and Web API into one app. It has a new lightweight and modular request pipeline, meaning that the app process runs faster. You're no longer tied to the full .NET framework and, like we stated before, using a lot of that old unused code in the full .NET framework. ASP.NET Core allows you to deploy your application into multiple deployment and hosting environments. You can host it on Windows, Mac OS X, or Linux operating system. You can deploy it to Microsoft Azure. You're no longer tied to a Windows operating system for your ASP.NET application deployment. One thing that can be kind of a downer is that if you like coding in ASP.NET Web Forms, it will not be available in ASP.NET Core. Microsoft has made it clear that they are not going to migrate Web Forms into the new framework. And the reason that is because Web Forms is really dependent on the full .NET framework to emit its different server and data controls. But if you still like developing in Web Forms, there are new techniques and new enhancements to the Web Forms framework, but you still have to deploy and build your Web Forms applications in a Windows environment. This is just a key reminder that if you're looking for Web Forms in ASP.NET Core, it's not available. So here's a chart of ASP.NET 4.6 and ASP.NET Core 1.0. You can see how the environments overlap. The key difference to take from this diagram is with .NET Core 1.0 and future .NET Core apps, you can build it with Linux, Mac OS X, and Windows. With the full .NET Framework 4.6, you can still build those apps, but they will only be able to run in a Windows environment. .NET Core is specifically targeting Mac OS X and Linux devices. Going forward, I think Microsoft will take the .NET Core principles and implement it in the full .NET Framework so that it can lean up and enhance the performance of full .NET Framework applications. With an ASP.NET Core application, you have three different breakdowns of package management. First off, with NuGet, you have your server-side package manager. And the beautiful thing about that is that all of your reference assembly libraries are managed in your project.json file. Now the Bower client-side packages are not managed by NuGet. They can be managed through Bower that will install all your client-side libraries such as jQuery, Bootstrap, and all these different libraries associated with your client side. So the server and client side are separated between Bower and NuGet. You also have a package manager associated with Node.js. So any libraries that you want to install and implement in your ASP.NET Core app, you can also implement this with Node.js. So this is Microsoft's way of competing with today's modern day web technologies. In the past, they have tried to hold firm to the .NET framework and not make it open source. And to keep in mind that the full .NET framework is not open source, but going forward with ASP.NET Core, it's fully open source and it's on GitHub, and Microsoft is trying to be more open with its technologies so developers on whatever platform they are on can develop ASP.NET Core applications and build it in their different cross-platform environments. I want to thank you for joining me in this lecture. Have a nice day.